So I will turn it over to you, and I'm going to ask speakers to flip their own slides. I think I'll do it for you, Susan, at the beginning, and to you, Simon.
Mark, thank you very much. And it's actually great to see what kind of progress you managed to achieve with building this community, with building this platform. I remember you had 3 slides, and now we have these beautiful videos. What I like the most about them is that you have the best pictures of me I have. Like, somehow you got the best of me. And thanks very much for introducing this particular deep dive. So hello everyone, and welcome to our sequel of deep dives on the future of work, an intellectual pursuit also known as the FOE. Today we will bring forward some of the future workplace challenges that are specific to women. We will talk about the issues that can benefit from direct and indirect applications of technologies. We will see that the investment opportunities in these areas are immense. That's exactly what Mark was talking about when he was saying that inclusion doesn't mean only a social thing and a media thing, but it's actually a very good business opportunity, a set of very good business opportunities for all of us. The examples of direct applications are improvements in medical care, household management, and tools specific to the era of remote work. Indirect technology-enabled changes, such as access to media that helps highlight and elevate problems. It does the increase of awareness is bound to promote the need for direct applications. It does for bound to promote business opportunities. In other words, we will talk about new and old trends in different parts of the world and how investments can alleviate the bad ones and promulgate the good ones. Personally, I felt that life was not fair to women observing my mom. She had to work and carry the load for the family, while my dad was solving interesting problems at work. I came from a traditional society where men admired women before the marriage and then, in many cases, were demeaning and abusing them for the rest of their lives. My paternal grandmother supposedly wished my mom to have only sons because otherwise her mother's heart would be in eternal pain seeing the fate of her daughters. Let's face it, traditionally men view women as the opposite sex. We don't look at ourselves as well as women as two groups with different needs. The technology in many ways accentuates all the differences by providing equal access to expression through media and channeling the voices into political expression. As a result, both groups need to learn more about needs of each other. You will hear from our keynote speakers many facts that will break the stereotypes of both conservatives and liberals. It is not that we will learn it is not only that we will learn statistics and facts, but also we'll hear addressable issues and solutions. In fact, I hope you, like me, will come to the conclusion that the ensuing trend is so powerful that the name of our deep dive, Future is Female, is not far-fetched. We will hear from thought leaders, ultra-successful professionals who are also mothers of as many as 7 kids. As a side note, when I had my first child, I didn't know what to do with him. Now I have no clue what I'm doing with 2 kids. And our guests are far ahead of me. They don't know what to do with 7 kids. Susan Payne, our first keynote speaker, has been living life of adventure, like other speakers, by the way. She's a lawyer by training. Susan set up and ran emerging market desks for 2 bulge bracket banks, founded and ran an emerging market fund. In general, it seems that she cannot stop running. When she ran out of inspiration in banking, she started running marathons and keeps running them while running a few agricultural businesses in Africa. Even as a typical representative of Africa, she doesn't look typical. Susan will share her observations on Africa and thoughts on investment opportunities that will benefit people, especially women of Africa. The bios of other speakers are as incredible. Our second keynote speaker, Alex, will talk about the successes of women, notwithstanding all the awkward issues that still exist in the workplace. Alex is a partner in one of the largest global integrators and the winner of the Goldman Sachs Global Women Leaders Award. She will go over statistics that will show that women demonstrate the results that stand by themselves and justify the push to get them accepted in top management roles. Denise, whom we all know and greatly respect, will share her vision of a work dynamic in the future and the increased importance of women for the success of businesses. Denise is co-founder of this series of deep dives and will help the audience to stay engaged throughout the entire event by running chat. Please keep it busy by participating. Gary Bells, who advises a few governments on FOA-related issues, is our fourth keynote speaker. Gary will share methodological perspective on the observations of the preceding speakers. His summary will help us better understand which issues are solvable and highlight the concepts that may help us understand the intellectual background of some ideas of OECD governments. Let's step back to the definition of the future of work. It is a loosely defined intellectual quest to predict and direct many forces of change affecting three deeply connected dimensions of an organization: work, the what, workforce, the who, and the workplace, the where. Three keynote speakers will be talking about the who, women, and what section of FOA. Denise, however, will address the where section, and so will our panel comprised of the fund managers. Our panel participants are very successful female entrepreneurs and fund managers. They will share their experiences and observations that shall give the audience a better understanding of what can be done to make the opportunities equal while considering specific needs and talents of women. In other words, we will cover all the bases of the FOA. In conclusion, I would like to thank Mark again for helping us, and with this, I invite Susan to the mic. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone from England. I'd like to talk to you today for the next 10 minutes about investing in women-led businesses, with a particular spotlight on emerging markets where I've worked over the last 30 years, as Simon has referred. What I'd like to explore is why women remain underinvested and underrepresented despite the growing number of successful female founders and female-focused businesses around the world. Some of the data and facts may surprise you. And though there's evidence of what I would call a new normal evolving around women's roles in the workplace, I'll then wrap up by discussing some of the opportunities I see available for investment. And those are going to be largely focused in Africa, where I am currently based. Where I sit in a developed market in the UK, progress has been slow. While we're seeing increasing numbers of board seats taken by women, a subject to be covered in more detail by Alex Gren next, there are, believe it or not, equal numbers of CEOs called Peter as there are female CEOs in the FTSE 100 full stop, 6 to be exact. On a slightly more positive note, though, a number of FTSE 100 female directors has risen by 50% in the last 5 years due to certain successful initiatives in the UK. What's evident is that the numbers of women in positions of authority are increasing, though slowly. There are now 29 female heads of state globally. There are more women heads of law firms, a very few of banks. Across all sectors, really, there are increasing female numbers, including in previously male-dominated professional sports like rugby and boxing. This new normal involving the rising profile of women across multiple sectors and leading businesses, I think is supported by three things. The first is a new focus on diversity and inclusion globally, as well as on mental health, mindfulness, and well-being. The benefits and value of diversity to any collective unit, including boards, have been proven, with female representation in top management found to improve innovation, compliance, and the bottom line. Secondly, the COVID reset that has shone a brighter light on global roles, gender, and diversity. While COVID has created economic dislocation and challenges around the world, it's allowed us, actually it's forced us, to show greater empathy for others at both an individual and a national level, like frontline workers. Gender issues melt away in crises, and solutions have required the competence, innovation, and drive of diverse people working together, regardless of gender, company, culture, or country. We've seen very recently international reckonings involving global inequality, racism, and the role of women, highlighting the often unpaid invisible work they do. And these have run alongside the Me Too movement, the social call to arms against sexual abuse and harassment. All of these issues highlight the necessity for a more inclusive future for all of us, especially for women. And finally, the vital role of female networks and initiatives, like the 30% Club in the UK to increase women on boards. Equally, one noteworthy network was 85 Broad, started by the luminary Janet Hansen, a former Goldman Sachs financier, who launched this early professional women's network in 1997 that grew to 30,000 members in 130 countries before it was sold in 2013 and renamed Elevate. I worked with Janet at Goldman and then headed the UK chapter of 85 Broads for a decade, witnessing its impact on women collaborating firsthand in those early days. Today, there are various highly successful women's networks that continue to make an impact empowering women, like 100 Women in Hedge Funds, like the My Connections mentoring program launched by General Electric in the UAE, and also Women of the Future, a network which is based in the UK and Asia Pacific and headed by another extraordinary woman named Pinky Lalani. Against this backdrop of the rise of women in developed markets and initiatives and structures that support them, this new normal is challenged in emerging markets, especially frontier emerging markets. In fact, a three-tier system has resulted separating the developed markets from the BRICS and the UAE as advanced developing markets, and finally from Africa, the frontier market. What is clear is that in emerging economies generally, female talent is underinvested and underleveraged, and the reasons are both work and family related. Women often face a triple whammy of gender, ethnicity, and cultural attitudes. Of respondents in Brazil, China, and the UAE, as you'll see here, the more developed of the emerging markets, 25 to 36% believe that women are treated unfairly in the workplace because of their gender. In India, the number is 45%. In Russia, the figure is only 19%, owing to its communist legacy. Mark, I think that slide is the wrong slide. I'm sorry. If you could go back one. Is that the... Thank you very much. That's super. That's what I'm looking for. Regarding women's income, in the best case scenario, only 42% of highly educated women earn as much as or more than their spouses. Positively, though, the tertiary education of women in the BRICS and UAE, as well as their ambition, is extremely robust, as you'll see on that slide. In India, over 80% of women aim to hold a top job, which compares with 40% in the US. 55% of university degrees are completed by women across emerging markets, very close to 58% in the US. In the more developed emerging markets, we see the ingredients to a seed to the top exist, but are often hampered by unique EM pushes and pulls. Family pulls are not simply about childcare, but especially in the BRIC countries, about taking care of elders. In India and China, many educated women may have one or no children, but 70% will have elder care responsibilities. Far more women in these countries live with their parents, and 68% assist their parents financially, according to a Harvard study. Also, there are cultural differences. In Saudi, for example, there is gender-based segregation in work and public spaces. Until 2017, women were not allowed to drive in Saudi, and there still prevails a male guardianship system where a man controls a Saudi woman's life from her birth until her death. So how to locate the talented women in emerging markets? What studies show is that multinationals deeply want to harness talent in emerging economies, but do so largely through universities. In Brazil, women are 60% of college graduates, in the UAE, 65%. So this works very well in those regions. However, the advancement of women is hampered not just by elder care and gender bias, but also by travel and safety issues. Crime is rife in many emerging markets, and travel is not always easy nor welcome. Brazil has issues of kidnapping, India of eve teasing and of rape. What happens when many females lack the opportunity to even get to university, though, where they then have no representation? This is much more common in Africa, a high growth continent with multiple opportunities, but certain obstacles and contradictions. Thanks, Mark. On the one hand, Africa is a continent of 54 countries with a larger landmass than China, India, and the USA and Europe combined, with 8 of the top 15 fastest growing economies in the world, and with demographic drivers second to none. Of its 1.2 billion population, 60% of its citizens are under 25 years old, making it the world's youngest continent, and will comprise the largest workforce in the world by 2040. Unlike many emerging markets, thank you very much, unlike in many emerging markets where university degrees are taken by more women than men, the major issues in Africa are lack of education and lack of wage-earning employment. Africa's youth is one of the greatest resources it has, yet higher education remains low and unemployment high. Africa has the highest rate of educational exclusion in the world, with 60% of children between 15 and 18 years old not in school, and girls are much more likely not to go to school than boys. Only 9% of the African population attends university at all, whereas 51% does so in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 80% in OECD countries. Shockingly, at this rate, the World Economic Forum's 2018 Global Gender Gap Index shows it will take 128 years to close the gender gap in Africa. However, there are 2 encouraging facts about the continent. First, perseverance. For a continent blighted by the world's highest maternal mortality rate, low levels of legal protection for women, and poor tertiary education, it beats all regions globally in its proportion of women entrepreneurs. It is the world's leader in female business owners. This is a key ingredient for Africa's growth, as women make up 50% of Africa's entrepreneurs, although they earn 34% less than men. Why? 2 reasons. In Africa, startups are often seen as a necessity for women and not a choice, since wage opportunities are scarce. Training is often not available, and discrimination a problem in hiring practices. This is further impacted as women carry an uneven burden of childcare, and women often operate in comparatively less profitable sectors. However, I've also found many very well-educated and ambitious African women to be highly entrepreneurial and seek to go it on their own, often using microfinance or family loans. The second surprise to you may be that Africa is a global leader, in fact, the global leader of women on boards. According to McKinsey, 25% of board members are female, compared with Europe at 23%, and the laggard Latin America at only 7%. This advance is being led by only a handful of African nations, however, South Africa, Botswana, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, and in jobs where women are unlikely to lead. When we say the future is female, it is to spotlight certain facts. Women university graduates globally exceed men. Women consumers globally form a growth market larger than the markets of India and China combined. Professional women globally are ambitious, though underinvested. Combine this with the rabbit hole of opportunities on continents like Africa, for example, and there is a mass of untapped potential to be realized. Mark, can you take the slides off? That's great, thank you. That's perfect. Basically, Africa is the world's next biggest growth market, where a business revolution is currently underway, where rapid tech makes the continent fertile for innovation. I view Africa as a generational opportunity. There are over 400 companies with revenues of over $1 billion, 1.4 trillion in consumer spending, soon to be 2.1 billion in consumer spending, which is already more than India. This really is a call to entrepreneurs and to organizations seeking expansion opportunities across the board in emerging markets, with a focus on the many entrepreneurs on the continent, many female entrepreneurs on the continent. My particular focus is food and agriculture, infrastructure, and food delivery systems. And I'm interested in food security. The agri-sector in Africa provides the main source of livelihood for 60% of the population in Africa, and up to 80% in many African countries like Zambia. Also, investment in food and agriculture has a larger impact on the alleviation of poverty than in any other sector, and the opportunities are vast because Africa imports $40 billion of food each year and yet has the land, labor, and climate to be entirely self-sufficient and an exporter. At Holistic, we're currently raising capital for various projects in plant protein, renewables, CBD, hemp, and others, but we're also advisors in emerging markets generally and happy to work with any investors to identify the best in class in any business sector. While the tide is changing in developed markets, I hope that the new normal globally might encourage some of you to contemplate investment opportunities among the various female-led businesses in emerging economies that will, possibly sooner than you think, compete very favorably with the developed markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Alex, it's your turn. Susan, it was brilliant, very interesting.
Thank you, Susan.
Great. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. I'm Alex Gren. Hello to everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Mark, Simon, and Denise. Lovely to be here and to share with you some statistics on where we are in terms of board diversity and participation of women in VC funding. I'll aim to show you how addressing the gender gap that Stephen has referred to at the beginning in business could unlock up to $28 trillion in global GDP, as per recent numbers from McKinsey. We can move forward. So women make up 50% of the world population. As referenced by many business leaders over the years, it is remarkable that many societies, the more progressive ones, as well as those more traditional, would continue to ignore economic facts around the continued untapped opportunities for their country's GDPs and for the wealth and the well-being of their own people by holding women back. Women have always been crucial to social and economic progress. They have been called upon at times of crisis over the centuries as well as now. In the last 18 months, we've all been reminded by those keeping count how well countries managed by women have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, reducing its impact on the country's economies as well as the lives of the people. Historic examples abound as well. The picture of the bottom right-hand side of this slide is iconic. It was taken in 1927, and it shows some of the world's most respected scientists of those times, including Einstein. What makes this picture particularly significant is that there's only one woman in the group, Marie Curie, born Maria Skłodowska in 1867 in Poland. She was determined to become a scientist at a time when women in the Western world couldn't vote, often couldn't own property, women in general were not being educated, and whilst her native country of Poland didn't exist on the map as it was occupied. Yet, Maria didn't let any of those small details stop her. For a long time, she was the only person, woman or man, to have been awarded the Nobel Prize twice in two fields, chemistry in 1903 and physics in 1911. In fact, she helped millions of men. How? When World War I broke out in Europe in 2014, Maria saw a way to apply her expertise to save lives of the wounded soldiers. She took her electromagnetic radiation X-ray machines and helped doctors identify bullets and shrapnel embedded in the soldiers' bodies and remove them. She was a trailblazer, and she inspired a lot of women over the last century and today, and girls to become scientists. So as the brand advertising campaign from Adidas goes, impossible is nothing, not even the prospect of future being female. Let's go to the next slide. There's a long history of examples of women determination to get their seat at the table, and many success stories of global businesses being built and run by women leaders. In the last 20 years, the private sector has stepped up its focus on investing in women and has committed hundreds of millions of funding to the cause. Back in March of 1998, Goldman Sachs founded the 10,000 Women Initiative, which committed $100 million at that time to providing business and management education and training, links to capital, mentoring, and networking to 10,000 women all around the world. Today, apart from numerous large-scale organizations' commitments to women empowerment, wealthy individuals such as Mackenzie Scott and Melinda Gates have pledged billions to support women empowerment causes. Next slide. So what's the business case? Well, data shows that gender equality improves a company's bottom line and boosts the global economy. A growing body of evidence shows how companies can benefit from investing in women as employees, entrepreneurs, customers, and community partners. Such investments help companies in several ways, from broadening the talent pool to increasing productivity, providing an opportunity to transform local and global markets. Companies with women at the top and through the organization perform better across all metrics, as you can see referenced here, in terms of return on equity, share price, performance, growth rate. Actually, these studies and the results they're showing in terms of performance keep getting better and better, and studies abound in the public domain. Next. McKinsey Global Insights did a study in 2020 and showed that gender inequalities are not only a moral and social conundrum, but also an economic one. As stated at the beginning, women account for half the world's working age population, but for only 37% of GDP. That discrepancy robs the global economy of about 12 trillion in wealth we could share if each country improved gender equality as quickly as the fastest improving country in its region did. True gender equality everywhere could raise global GDP by up to 28 trillion, which is a powerful statistic to ignore. That's the price of gender inequality. Now let's look at some of the data points if we move to the next slide. Numbers don't lie. What we're getting from numerous studies is some facts around how diverse companies are 33% more likely to have greater financial returns, how companies with above average management diversity generate 19% higher innovation revenues, but still only 12% of decision makers at VC firms are women, and less than 3% of all VC dollars flow to companies led only by women. Corporate America is broken for women. Women fall behind men from the very first promotion. This is what's referred to as the broken rung in the corporate ladder. Women who still reach the top hit a ceiling and often get stuck as COOs, the number twos. Only 7% of Fortune CEOs are women. If we move forward. The best way to fix this isn't to blame or to exclude men who are in charge and can be powerful allies, but we can also help them understand their unconscious biases, which could be their blind spots. Also, when it comes to improving performance of their assets. So when it comes to the missed opportunities, a recent study performed by IBM showed that actually the pandemic, which hit us so hard over the last 18 months, have turned back the clock for women. We're actually doing worse. Whole societies and economies, millions of men and women suffered, but women and minorities especially have been hit the hardest. If Elon Musk had already figured out for some of us to live on Mars by now, we might be lured into thinking that this is not our problem. Although he is highly confident that SpaceX will land humans on Mars by 2026. However, people with some appreciation for history and the fact that no country is immune from the "this cannot happen here" situation recognize that social and economic stability are key to everybody's long-term well-being and peaceful future of each country. Enabling glaring disparities to thrive and deepen can only push the losing side of the trade to radical moves. That's why the time to act is now. The ambivalence that's on the rise has already been referenced by Stephen and Susan and other speakers. The burdens of looking after elderly and children at home and juggling many responsibilities have really impacted women and minorities. And the social unrests witnessed over the last 2 years especially are not disconnected from what's happening on the employment front. That's why men are actually key to driving change. And the mindset shifting is key to ensuring that there's more prosperous and peaceful future for all of us, especially when it comes to the pipeline building in terms of women, whereby women in early and middle career stages are hit the hardest, because this is the age bracket where usually they have to juggle a lot of responsibilities outside of work. We go forward. So in terms of funding onto corporate boards, there's still a lot to be done in bringing more women into executive and non-executive boards. BCG reported that companies with above average diversity create innovation revenue, which is key to the growth aspect of each company. Currently, women hold 20% of the board seats of the Russell 3000 companies, which is an increase from 17% in 2018. Despite the improvements, 41% of Russell 3000 companies still have one or no women on their boards. In 2018, California became the first US state to pass Bill 826, mandating all public companies with executive offices in that state to have at least one woman on their boards by December 2019. Massachusetts, Washington, and others are following California's lead on diversity. Along with the new laws, companies face pressure from institutional investors like BlackRock, State Street, Fidelity, to improve board diversity. Actually, Goldman Sachs said that it would not take public companies with no diversity or women on the board. The second phase of the Bill 826 has a deadline of December 2021, and it compels companies with 5-member boards to have at least 2 female members, and increasingly so as the boards are bigger. When it comes to VC funding, the data is quite abysmal. Women throughout the sort of life cycle of the funding face bigger hurdles in terms of questions that are being asked on the risk side, in terms of opportunities, in terms of mixed teams. And what happened last year in terms of attracting less than 3% of VC funding just goes to show how impossible kind of the task of developing women leaders in running companies and in generating higher performance results for investors is becoming. If we go to the next slide, yes, there's another data point around a BCG study which showed that startups funded and co-funded by women garner less in investments but generate more revenue. So it's quite amazing to see these stats, and yet it's amazing to see that people are not realizing the opportunity, the money left on the table, and are unable to change their mindsets, biases, and the fact that there's so many blind spots which are precluding people from actually generating more wealth only because of their cultural kind of boundaries in their own heads. If we go further. So in terms of first movers, there are companies that are already doing a lot, and those institutional investors I had referenced are really at the forefront, and they're kind of making the market in terms of driving the change for women. Again, I referenced a number of studies and they abound, but greater representation of women translates into reported 61% higher revenue growth and 54% increase in creativity and innovation. Again, this is a data point that comes from the recent IBM report. So if you want to make investments in leaps and not in increments, drive change. become change agents, not only for your daughters and for your wives, partners, friends, but really for your communities, for the countries you live in, for the economy. So treat gender equity and the representation of more women in business as if your survival or your assets performance survival depended on it. If you can make more, you know, an increased 20 or 30% return on your assets, why wouldn't you ask hard questions of your boards, of the companies you've invested in, on the companies you're working with as partners? Define and track goals, drive accountability, and not just statements. Remember that it's not, if you want to change the world, it's not by your opinion, but by your action, as I heard a wise person say. So, so remember that change starts with us, and not with the outside world. Focus on the middle to build pipeline, anywhere you are actually, also in terms of your investments. Something that doesn't sometimes look like you know, the sort of person or the investment to follow, others might poach very quickly. And that's how a lot of hiring happens with women. It's actually not so easy for them to climb the corporate ladder in their own companies. And very often they're actually poached by competition because they're realizing that they're just not being heard. And define and track those inclusive environment metrics, meaning how conducive is the environment for women to actually, or for younger women to actually develop and work within those companies. Next, and then some just examples to leave you with some amazing women, especially Kathy Murphy and Abigail Johnson on the Bloomberg front page. I was a mentee, job shadowed Kathy Murphy and got to know Fidelity quite well. Kathy Murphy is the president of Fidelity Personal Investing and will be retiring this year after 12 years of an amazing run where she grew Fidelity's primary being B2B financial company to one with nearly 4 trillion direct to consumer business. She grew the business fourfold. And Abby Johnson, obviously the chair and the granddaughter of the founder. So there are many examples of amazing women around you. Some of them are already at a C-suite. Others are just coming up in the pipeline. Take a moment to look around. Take a moment to actually be the one who spots that opportunity around you, because opportunities are everywhere, but you need to be able to find them. Thank you.
Alex, thank you so much. Very inspiring, really. And statistics, and I wouldn't say that statistics was ever more inspiring to me than today. Thank you. And now, Denise, is your turn. I will take up your task on the chat for now.
Oh, okay, go for it. Excellent presentation so far. Susan, I really appreciated the global aspect. That was kind of new news for me. And I think just having that idea of what's happening differently in other parts of the world provides a degree of context to this conversation that is really, really valuable. And Alex, your stats and your points here are just so valid. Like, just we are literally leaving money on the table by not addressing this issue in a more material way. So I love the instructions as well of what people can do in their day-to-day decision making to address this. So while Simon is taking over and moderating the chat, I have a couple of slides that I want to run through you, and I want to just give you a little bit of perspective on how I'm coming at this conversation. So I'm a workplace futurist and founder at Sway Workplace. So I come from a different side of the conversation. What we're doing at Sway is building a platform that allows managers to build more engaged and connected teams in a hybrid workplace by combining training, coaching, and community. And we do this because we fundamentally believe in two things. We believe that the future of work is flexible work, and we believe that the future is female. The future of work is code for an unprecedented degree of change in how we approach work. We see this as an opportunity to systematically equalize the playing field through our collective actions and by co-creating the future that we want to live in. Next slide, Mark.
And by the way, Denise, do you want to take over or you want me to?
No,
do
you
it?
can go for it. No problem.
All right, sorry. This is not my forte, but go.
Okay. So my contribution to the conversation is more about how do we uncover the why of the situation and of the matter. So we've seen the presentation so far, and that the data is really crystal clear, that having a strong and active female workforce at companies in senior leadership positions, on boards, funding, starting, and running disruptive companies just makes better business sense. And it seems to me like it's an extraordinary opportunity to be able to solve what is an emotional, social, community, and moral issue, whilst improving the probabilities of making more money than if you had not. So what I am stuck on is the why can't we get there when all of this makes sense? So if Elon Musk's Tesla Roadster is floating in space, we find ourselves here tripping over the same conversation. So why is a powerful word, because if you continue to ask it, you'll find yourself on the inside of the conversation and on a path to finding what is the root of the problem and the answer to the why. Next slide, Mark. I look for the why in two ways. The first is through the lens of thinking like a futurist. So futurism is not about predicting the future. So there are no crystal balls, there's no potions, and there's no tea leaves. It's an analytical approach that looks at both historical patterns and existing signals to create a plausible scenario for what the future may hold. It's about making informed and wise decisions today to shape the future that we want to live in. So what's a signal? Signals are a specific example of the future in the present. It's like getting a call about a clue that something is changing and a trend is emerging. Next slide, Mark. So there are three signals that I've been tracking that lead me to believe that the future is female. The first one is that according to data released by the CDC, the US birth rate fell to the lowest point in more than a century. Other data report is that the US population grew by only 7.4% over the past decade, which is the smallest increase since the 1930s. The birth rate declined for the sixth straight year, and the average adult today has 17% fewer children than they did in 1990 and 50% fewer than in 1960. So it's not uncommon for advanced economies to experience a lower birth rate as more women are educated and enter the workforce. But what is a concern is the drop that is due to slow growing incomes and the childcare crisis. And what could that long range impact be of a continuing decline in the birth rate? Totally as a side note, in March, Israeli scientists had a breakthrough when they grew hundreds of mouse embryos in artificial wombs, saying that this groundbreaking method could lead to human gestation outside of the womb, decoupling childbearing from women. So when I saw that, I'm like, is that a call that I would want to take from the future? The second signal I'm looking at is in Q1 2019, Pew Research reported that women made up half the US college-educated labor force. So women had been earning the majority of degrees in the US since the early 80s. Of those who earned a bachelor's degree last year, 57.5% were women. And yet historically, women have been less likely to enter the workforce after graduation, 36% less likely, according to Bloomberg. It wasn't until this year that they edged out men with similar degrees to become the majority. So these comments and that data is from 2019. And this trend is projected to continue, meaning that the future labor force will be increasingly and predominantly female. Next slide, Mark. The third signal I've been looking at is in the future of work, the most valued and sought after skills are those that are naturally associated with female energy. As we continue to move away from the traditional hierarchical structure of companies towards decentralized organizations, we will rely less on the masculine oriented skills of command and control and rely increasingly on the female oriented skills of compassion, empathy, patience, collaboration, and teamwork. So these are traits that used to be considered weak, have now actually become a superpower in the future of work. In an AI-influenced world of work, the companies that will flourish will be those that elevate the human capabilities of its people. So these signals are what I follow that helps me shape my view that the future is indeed female, and it really is a check-the-box exercise. So the falling birth rate's an opportunity for an unencumbered workforce. The college-educated labor pool is predominantly female, and with an abundance of the sought-after skills. So for all intents and purposes, the future is female. However, I see that this is on paper only. The second way I look for the why is through the lens of systems thinking. It's a really powerful way to look at any issue because it's a process that mutes noise and distractions and allows you to bypass the symptoms to see the source of the problem itself. As Deming wisely quotes, if you want to change how people behave, change the system. Here's a little story to demonstrate what that means. And there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" You have to step out and away from the situation to look back and see all that you have to work with. Next slide, Mark. I think that we can all agree that we don't have a supply issue. The ambitious and highly educated female labor pool continues to grow. And I don't think that we have a demand issue. I mean, diversity and inclusion initiatives are very widely embraced and the economics are better. What we have is a pipeline issue. This is what's been referred to earlier, and this is what McKinsey calls the broken rung. Next slide, Mark. The biggest obstacle women face is that very first step up to management. It's a structural flaw in the system of work that causes women to drop out or step back in the labor force right at this point. This creates an imbalance with men holding 62% of manager level positions and women just 38%. So even as hiring and promotion rates improve for women at senior levels, women as a whole can never really catch up because there are simply too few women to advance. Last slide, Mark. So we need to work harder and dig deeper to implement systemic change. As Janet Yellen discussed this week as part of the explanation of the anemic jobs report, nearly 2 million have not yet returned. The challenge before us is to help these 2 million women return to the labor market. And I think that the real question is, can we afford to not develop the latent female potential in the labor pool? So I think that we have a case here for forced interventions to change the system of work to solve for these issues. And some of the ways that we can have a forced intervention is by solving the childcare crisis. Another is by implementing workplace flexibility. Flexible work is one of the most powerful ways to systematically equalize the playing field between men and women at work, period. An improvement of hiring and promotion mandates. Obviously, there's an increase needed in funding for female-founded and led companies, and creating a culture of mentorship and allyship. These are just 5 examples of forced interventions that can prove for a new system. So what is your call to action? What systematic change are you committing to the decisions that you make? So how do you use the privilege of your position and power? Not only is that an amazing alliteration, but it's also a personal call to action. So how do you move closer to the center of change, not just for the women in your immediate orbit, but the ones that you see from a distance? Where and how do you invest your time, energy, and capital in funds, companies, and projects that are directly leading the charge towards the systematic change that we need? And one idea is to audit your actions and to look at the gender differentials on where you place your capital and hold these companies to a higher standard. So that's what I have on the future is female, slightly different perspective, but I hope that it gives a different lens and provides more depth and context to the immediacy of the problem and ways that we can solve it.
Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you for your perspective. As always, very refreshing, and you're providing a different framework, as you said, the futuristic framework to our issues. And Gary, you are the next, and you had 3 brilliant speakers. It will be a real difficult task for you to get up to their speed, but please help us understand how we can look at all the issues which we heard today from the perspective of the governments, from the perspective of the more research side of the future work.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Simon. So absolutely, I feel completely unqualified to talk about women and the future of work. I often say that whenever you try to understand nascent growth markets, you shouldn't listen to someone who speaks for the trees. You should talk to the trees. And the women who've spoken so far today are, as far as I'm concerned, towering trees that you should listen to. But I'm very passionate about this arena, so I'm sure I used an inappropriate amount of whining so I could offer a few thoughts here and be included in the panel. So I know that many of those watching are investors and advisors who are constantly looking for underinvested categories. And I just want to offer both some historical perspective looking back and then some, maybe futuristic perspective looking forward. But basically, 40 years ago, I moved to Silicon Valley, and I began pointing to the range of opportunities that I thought would be created as technology would transform industries and markets and economies. And then 20 years ago, I became obsessed with what I called accelerating the flow of capital to good, how you could get as much money in the world to want to have a positive impact. And with several partners operating as a nonprofit called Collective Intelligence, we pushed for ideas like that business with a purpose would help to transform a variety of industries, that clients of high net worth advisory would be pounding the table for opportunities for impact investing, and that CIOs at foundations would eventually be investing their corporate in impact. And with my partners, I co-founded something called SoCap, Social Capital Markets, which has become the largest gathering of impact investors and impact investments on the planet. So today, I'm telling you that one of the most significant shifts that we can anticipate over the next 20 years is to see women as an investment class. Not in a creepy, extractive way, but in a way that is going to transform markets. Now, as Anissa just pointed out, you already know that we are at a pivot point in the shift in the world of work. We're rewriting the rules of work as we speak. As a matter of fact, tiny commercial, but I think we're going to emerge from this period with what I call the next rules of work, and that's actually a title of a book I've got coming out in August. And the reason I point to that is I think there's sort of 3 legs of the stool, and those 3 legs of the stool are actually extraordinarily useful ways to think about this investment class as an opportunity. I think the previous speakers have made it very, very clear. They both highlighted the problem domain, which is that there are so many different aspects of the world of work and business that women have the potential to transform and yet don't have access to the capital, access to the boardroom, and so on. But there's a solution domain, and that's to accelerate the flow of capital into this arena. And the 3 legs of the stool that I want to point to are mindset, skill set, and tool set. Now, as Alexander said, you need an investor mindset that women as an asset class are an under-leveraged opportunity. That is the mental framework that allows you to approach this variety of different opportunities in terms of investment as if there is a delta. This is clearly there's a delta between what could be accomplished by these businesses and these investment opportunities if they had more access to capital and more mentoring and support. But it's a mindset, it's a new filter or lens that's necessary to approach this. Secondly, there's an investor skill set. How will you build the network and the diligence processes that will help you to identify and then fund women-owned companies, businesses that are meeting the needs of women as customers and consumers as the very nature of work changes. And also balancing the table of power in the C-suite, in the boardroom, to ensure that the organization of the future has the inclusive and diverse mindset and skill set that it needs to build successful businesses. And then finally, the third leg of the stool is tool set. What investment techniques and technologies can you leverage to deliver the risk adjustment metrics that you need to justify this new investment thesis, so you can leap ahead of your competitors to gain all the advantages of investing now in this rapidly emerging asset class? So what I'm suggesting is you take the long view. There's all sorts of near-term opportunities to very tactically and rapidly start focusing on this as an asset class, but take the long view. If you look back 40 years, you don't need me to convince you now to invest in technology. Pretty soon, you won't need anyone to convince you to invest in impact. I look forward to the day when investing with a gender lens will no longer be an issue. Nobody's going to have to convince anybody that supporting women in business and women as the future of work is simply sound investment strategy. But we're a long way from that today. So my 3 suggestions for you: expand your mindset to include the fact that women are the future of work and business. Develop the skill set to identify those investments and increase the flow of capital to this arena, and leverage the tool set that will help you to reap the benefits of investing in women as the future of work. Thanks a lot.
Gary, thank you very much for your passion and for your wisdom. To summarize this section of our deep dive, I would just want to say that all of us probably experience the situation that everybody is talking about the issues, everybody organizes book clubs, but very few people undertake any actions. And our today's deep panel is this call to action, not in the sense that let's do something, but in the sense of very specific objective. Let's identify the businesses and business opportunities which can benefit from our input, from our investments. Let's share them, and let's put at least a little bit of our money in the causes which can help these trends to accelerate, and maybe help young women to get more comfortable in the workplace, in the leadership positions. And it can be, we probably need mentors, both men and women, who will try to help them, not only with money, but also with our experience, with our connections. And let's be active. Let's have the next panel where we will bring our favorite startups, which will demonstrate their ability to solve this issue. And then we will actually be different from those who just talk. And hopefully the talk is cheap, but investments will be profitable. And with this, I'm giving the mic back to Denise. Denise, please start the panel. Thank you.
Sure. So we can have an interlude here, some Q&A, or we can go directly to our last few speakers. Simon, do you have a preference?
Denise, my preference is to satisfy the needs of the audience.
Okay.
If people feel comfortable listen to more information, that's great. If people feel that we have to discuss some issues, it's great again.
Okay.
The more engagement we have, the better it is.
Okay, then how about this? Let's go to our last few speakers, and there's some really excellent questions coming through in the chat that we can address towards the end, so we'll reserve some time for that. I hope you all enjoyed the keynote speakers and all the thoughts that we had, and it gave a real good illumination of the multidimensional aspect that is the potential for the future's female women at work. I'm really excited to introduce you to our next two panelists. Heather Henyon is a founding partner in Mindshift Capital, and she is actively investing globally in female-led companies. So when we talk about the fact that there's a lot of money left on the table, not in her firm, and I'm very interested for you to hear her perspective on how she sees the issue and the topic. And then we'll be very closely followed by Valerie for her perspective on the same issue. So Heather, if you would like to take it away from here.
And I just want to point out, it's ironic or elegant that they're both in Dubai.
the leaders of gender across the world, right, in Dubai. So not what one would expect, I don't think. So thank you, Denise, and thank you to the whole group for having me here today. I'm actually gonna, can I share my screen directly, Mark?
Go for it.
Just as you know, I've been introduced, I've been investing in women-led companies now for the last 8 or 9 years. I think probably since about 2012 was my first investment in a women-led startup and in technology, and now have invested in over 100 early-stage technology companies, primarily based in the US, Middle East, and Europe, and started the Women's Angel Investor Network, WAIN, in 2013. We made our first investment in 2014 and invested what we call with a gender lens. So for those who aren't familiar with gender lens, we define that as one female founder, at least, or co-founder who's also active in the business, so the day-to-day kind of operational part of the business. And when we started WAIN, we weren't sure kind of what the results would be, but we found that there was a massive demand. And this was only Middle East-based companies, by the way. So this was not a global mandate at the time. And just the number of companies, you know, that were looking for capital founded by women who didn't make it into the, I would say, conventional investment networks and circles, we were blown away by, and the quality as well. So we weren't sure, are these kind of, you know, unscalable cupcake types of businesses, lifestyle businesses that don't really qualify for venture capital or angel investment, but these were actually primarily technology companies. So that was my, I'd say, entree into gender lens investing. And since then, you know, I became involved with a number of other groups. And over again, these are mainly angel groups. I saw the same challenge that was described earlier. So a lot of these female founders could raise money at seed, but getting the next round of capital in from institutions was very challenging for them. And so that really was part of my motivation in setting up Mindshift Capital. So Mindshift is a global venture fund. We invest in early stage women-led tech companies. We do have, I would say, strong networks in the Middle East and US because of our Dubai-based presence and our team. We have invested in one company in Singapore. So I'll describe more about the portfolio and some of the kinds of companies that we're seeing. Our team is women-led, so primarily we've got one guy on the team, so he's our token partner. But otherwise, we're women-led because we also believe that we can relate more to the female founders who we're backing. So a bunch of us have been investing together for a number of years in various angel groups and came together to set up Mindshift. So while we're focused on gender, our fund thesis is also quite strong. We did our first close in February 2020, right before COVID. The sectors that we focus on are food tech, fintech, ed tech, health and wellness tech. And, you know, obviously we didn't predict COVID, but those were all the sectors that were accelerated by COVID and by the pandemic. And, you know, part of this is because we see these different shifts occurring across the world. So obviously one is related to gender, but then also for example, the shift we see in food. There's a massive shift towards veganism, clean eating, healthy wellness focus that we see pervasive in different markets. So not just in the US, but for example, in Dubai, we see the shift occurring over the last, 5 years, I would say. And that was part of why we decided to focus on these sectors. These are also the sectors where we see more female founders. And so again, we don't believe that there's a pipeline problem. We're actually inundated by deal flow and would love to back more of these women. We struggle with raising capital, just like founders of startups do. Again, I think, we're a nice example of some of the data points that Alex was sharing earlier. We've backed now 9 companies that are all women-led, and our returns have been excellent. We did our first fund audit for the year, by Frank Rimmerman and co out of San Francisco, and they validated our IRR of 47%, 1.6 increase in value in terms of multiples. And again, our thesis is really based on the fact that we're actually intentionally backing companies where there is money left on the table. So we're able to come in and support and invest in the companies that struggle to raise capital because we relate to the businesses that they're building. We're often the customers of their products. Just as a mother and someone who's got children using a lot of these educational apps, I can opine directly on my board roles where I'm the only one, on the board who's actually using the product. So it's a big differentiation, I think, in how we support founders and companies compared to my male counterparts. This is our portfolio, so I won't spend a lot of time going through this, but just wanted to highlight a couple that I think are really interesting and really doing revolutionary things. One is a company called Shiok Meats out of Singapore, 2 stem cell scientists, 1 Indian woman, and then 1 Singaporean woman. And basically they're creating shrimp and lobster as well out of cells. So there's no slaughter of an animal. There's no water used as well. So in terms of all the SDGs and impact and ESG, we don't position ourselves as an impact fund, but a lot of the founders that we back, I would say, are impact businesses because this company probably ticks like 5 of the UN SDGs. So amazing company, a lot of scale for this kind of business into food scarce markets. And obviously now with COVID, around supply chain, all you need is a lab to grow this shrimp. So we're really excited about being in this company. And the lead investor for this Series A round was Aquaspark, which is a Dutch fund led by Amy Novogratz. Some of you may know. Another business that we really like as well, and very interesting in kind of the femtech market, which is completely underinvested, and we're seeing more and more capital going to these kinds of companies. But I'm just, I keep telling our team members, it's crazy that we're still using the same, OBGYN tools that our mothers and grandmothers, had to use, and they're pretty much like medieval instruments. But then we have a new iPhone every 3 months. So again, what are the drivers of this, right? So, and who's in the driving seat, I think is the question. But we know that there's massive need for these kinds of businesses. So NX Prenatal is actually the first non-invasive blood test that can be done during pregnancy between weeks 10 and 12 of pregnancy to predict whether a baby will be born prematurely and the mother will get preeclampsia. So there's a lot of interest in this because all the other tests are invasive and have other health risks for the mother and the baby. But this is something that is really revolutionary. Again, what shocks me about a business like this, and if you talk to to Gail, who's the executive chair of the company, she just says they can't raise capital because all the investors are men, and they just say, well, the babies aren't dying. So why does it matter? A baby's born early, what's the big deal? But there's so much research and information showing that basically these babies, when they're born prematurely, develop all kinds of issues later on linked to immunity, diseases. And in markets like UAE and Saudi, 50% of the babies are actually born prematurely, which is the highest in the world. And part of why they were interested in Mindshift coming in as an investor. And then in countries like Jordan and Tunisia, the highest rate and cause of child mortality is due to premature infant birth. So there's clear health risks, that just because a baby isn't dying doesn't mean that there aren't other challenges, plus costs, right? The cost to the health system of putting babies in NICU and finding beds is a big challenge. So again, something revolutionary that we're backing. We believe it also, this is an impact company, but that's not how we position it. And again, we need a massive revolution in the way that we think about investing and where we put our capital. So that's part of the mind shift that really needs to occur both for women and for men. Mark, I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to go through everything. I think a lot of the data points were covered. The only thing that I wanted to highlight is that, you know, sometimes we as women-led venture capital funds are referred to as an endangered species because there really aren't many female GPs. If you look at even the number of partners now at some of the venture capital funds in the US, it's improving. I think now we're at like 10 to 12%. But if you look at founding partners, it's still 2%. So the amount of capital that's going to women, I think, is really linked to that. So again, the 2% of capital goes to all women teams, you know, less than 15% goes to diverse teams, which means 85% of capital is going to all white male teams, which is crazy in 2021. And yeah, and sorry, just the other data point I wanted to share around that is that if a female founder goes to a venture capital fund where there's at least one woman partner, she's 3 times as likely to get funded. So my feeling, you know, is that the more women VCs, the more women fund managers that we can back and kind of seed and get off the ground, you know, we also increase the likelihood that women founders will also receive capital. So we change both sides of the table by supporting the fund managers who are women. There are a bunch of angel groups that are now.
Heather, sorry to step, and I think we do need to help.
Okay, yeah. So I'll pause there. I mean, I'm happy to share more material and information. These are my contact details. But yeah, thank you again for having me and look forward to any questions.
Denise, can I just she mentioned Prenatal had Golden Seeds as an early investor. If you're not familiar with it, that's my lawyer set up the Arizona chapter, and I've been to their meetings, Loretta McCarthy and others. So it's another great way to catalyze this, as you saw. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah, Heather, that excellent presentation. Love putting the data and the action together to the results that you're seeing. And I think that, Mark, a great idea might be post this event to share all the links of the presentations with people. I think that people are getting a lot from it. And I think, Heather, for sure, we want to share out your information.
We also have an app.
Oh, my bad. My bad. See you all in the app. So we have one of our last speakers lined up, and then I actually have a question for somebody in the audience, but I'd like to introduce you to Valerie Hawley. And Valerie has an extraordinary background, but I think is equally as extraordinary is the fact that Valerie herself had actually left the workforce a number of years, prioritizing the balancing of her family, but came back in to grow a hugely successful career. So I'm very interested in how that happened, the difficulties and challenges, if you can get an idea for the use case of the fact that this can happen, it can happen well. And possibly the other counterpoint is, I'm not sure if Valerie and I are on the same page about the future as female. Clearly, I'm on one end of the spectrum, and I'd love the counterpoint because nothing more valuable to getting to the root of an issue than seeing a counterpoint. So Valerie, I'd love for you to introduce us into your background and possibly address those 2 questions. You're on mute there.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Denise, for this introduction, and thank you to all of you to have me. I'm probably a good use case of all what has been said so far, as many of us. But yes, I'm educated. I left education quite late, and then went into the workforce. And I was actually at KPMG. Manager at the manager level, and had my children quite late because I wanted to be financially independent, because women needed to have their independence and needed to have some ambition and a strong professional path. And I left KPMG to actually raise my children, because I think that was very, very important to me. I didn't want to leave that to anybody else, because at the end of the day, I think that women are biologically programmed for the survival of the species. They are programmed to transmit, and that's what I wanted to do. And even if I was really ambitious and career oriented, I decided that I was going to do that, and thought that it would be easy to go back to the professional life. Unfortunately, that was actually very difficult. I think it came from two facts. The first thing is that I have always been, I have a scientific background. I've always been in a very male environment, working in the automotive industry, in the management consulting, where very few women were employed at the time. And I think we grow with less self-confidence than our counterpart male. And so it was a problem of perhaps me lacking some self-confidence and thinking that I needed to prove myself. I needed to demonstrate quite a lot of skills. And basically, after 5 years of raising my children, and I went back at the bottom of the ladder. I started being a teaching assistant in a school here in Dubai, and had different jobs where I found always that I was completely overqualified and not satisfied with the level of responsibility I was given, and basically being completely bored. So I, in a way, decided to build my own company and started to be an entrepreneur. And I think that's also this difficulty to go back into the workforce that pushed me of being an entrepreneur and demonstrating my talent and making sure that I had the space to be who I was and to raise as I wanted. And it was quite a lot of, so I had to retrain. I then was not such a successful entrepreneur, so I went back to HEC in Paris and to look out for sectors that was going to be the sectors of the future, and retrain in innovation and entrepreneurship, and then managed to slowly go back onto the ladder of work. But it was very difficult, definitely. I think so. What I would have liked at the time is probably I would have liked that the ability to have flexible hours and to not be to have at the same time the ability to raise my children and have a part-time job with the same kind of responsibility that I used to have, not having to be downgraded to lower responsibility because I didn't spend the same amount of time at work. I would have liked to have the same kind of promotion, and that's what you were referring to, Denise, before. But saying that, I think the future of work, as we are going to see it after COVID, is going to bring this kind of flexibility. I think because everybody has been working from home, we are also very much on an outcome-based objective rather than time-based objective. We have flexible workplaces, we have flexible hours. I think also the fact that lifelong learning is coming into play, where we will have more fragmented pathway, where we will have to retrain, where we will have to change completely our skill set and change again, will be in favor of women workforce. And I think that will be, I mean, the other side of it is obviously that the roles of, we have so many roles and so many expectations that are attached to our different roles. We are a mother, we are a wife, we are a partner, we are a friend. We also need to take care of our self-development. So all these expectations are putting a lot of pressure. But I think more and more male are also sharing the chores. They are sharing this role, some of these roles, and by sharing all that, I think we can be sure that the woman will have a better future than perhaps our generation. I mean, when I look at my daughters, they are very assertive. I have pushed them, but I think I have pushed them to learn science and to be in STEM. And I think, but they have grown with a very strong sense of self. And I think that's great. I think what here in the Middle East, we see a lot of women that are very confident. I mean, that's the slide that I think Alex showed, 90, or perhaps Susan shows that 92% of Emirati women are very ambitious because they have jumped on the education. They have been the first one to be wanting to be educated. And they are very well respected in the workplace. They are very well, they are very empowered. I think also in terms of society, they have an easier life than many other nationality, because here you have people around, you have staff at home that can help you with many of the other chores. But I think this gender equality is actually coming through in the education system, in the way that we are, in the way we are educating our children and how assertive they are coming. I also think, I mean, as I said before, I think the fact that the topics are getting more longer term, that we're talking about climate change, that are talking about erasing poverty, these long-term challenges are more in sync, I think, with the way women think, because the women are, again, I think they are very much here to ensure the survival of the human species, and they have a much longer term vision than compared to more immediate considerations that men can have. And we have seen companies with very short term KPIs of the managers being evaluated on a quarterly basis, and I think this is changing. I think when the industrial revolution needed physical strength, so they needed the male strength. I think we don't need that anymore. It's more the power of the brain, and I think the STEM education and the women have a big role to play. And you can see it in biotech, in healthcare, as Eva was saying. I think you see more and more women funding companies and to solve problems related to women, but also to bigger issues.
Valerie, that's fantastic. Very, very much appreciate your perspective on that. Really valuable putting all these conversations together. We're going to move just a little ahead here onto some Q&A because we are almost at time. And actually, before we do...
Denise, sorry, I just have one thing to say, because I mean, it was a lot about the subject of not many female as a GP in the VC industry. So I'm part of a fund, a global fund that has 40 partners, and 20% of us are actually women. So we don't always find the right companies that have women to invest in, but at least we are pushing for that, definitely.
Awesome. Thanks, Valerie. I got a couple of very good questions in the Q&A here that I want to address. If you folks can hang on for an extra couple of minutes. Before we get to the actual Q&A, I do actually have a question for somebody that sits in our audience. Lisa, I know that you've had some real life experience of fundraising, and you are an owner of a co-working company in the city, and you've been through this process yourself. So this is now not theoretical, this is actual real life use case. I'd love if you have a couple of thoughts and comments on what it has been, your experience has been fundraising to fill the pipeline, the very one we just discussed.
Well, thank you, Denise, for bringing me to the stage, so to speak. Really appreciate this talk. I think just in and of itself, the fact that we're devoting time, thank you to all of the men who've shown up, for this panel, because otherwise we're women sort of talking into a vacuum, to ourselves here, I think, in the world. And so I think for me, I am the CEO and co-founder with two male co-founders, one who was with me at WeWork in the very beginning. I opened their first 2 locations. I've been CEO of the company for 6 years. And we've raised about $10 million. I absolutely spearheaded that effort. I have been almost exclusively surrounded by men, I would say, at the highest level, at negotiating leases, 10 men at the table and myself. It's been a really eye-opening experience, really, for me as a founder and owner. And so it's why I put into the comments here, I think that I'm a positive, optimistic, relentlessly resilient person, I think, by nature, and thanks, Mom, my upbringing. But I think that, so I give people the benefit of the doubt, and I think that men, and it's what I put into the comments here, it really starts with the education. I think, just again, coming onto this panel and recognizing that there are blind spots, where men asking themselves, I think, day in and day out, where can I intentionally be cause in the matter of listening to this woman more, providing an opportunity for a woman to rise. I mean, I think just on a very basic level is where it starts. And so, I could talk for a half hour on this. I do think it's with women also. I did have a recent experience, with a woman who I thought I could trust and then undermined me also. So I'm now cognizant of the fact that it's not always gender, sort of some of the bias, that are out there also. But I do think that just men in particular who are in power, being allies and advocates is really where it starts. So just an acknowledgement to all the men who've come into the discussion here today.
Lisa, that's all. Thank you for your contribution there. And look, I agree with you. The only way you're going to solve for any form of a challenge at women at work is by having a non-gendered conversation. Otherwise, the conversation is circular and goes back into the system that just caused the difficulties to begin with. So on that point, major shout out to Mark and Simon for embracing this topic. I have a really good feeling that this is not going to be the last of the conversation. So I wanted to get to a couple of questions. There's a lot of questions in there. We're not going to get to all of them. Perhaps we'll use the ones we don't get to tee up the next conversation. But Heather, I have a question for you that came in. Clearly we need more women investors to tackle the problem, but women face the compound challenge of access and investing when raising first-time funds. What advice can you offer to women first-time fund managers entering the VC space?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's a problem that we've also faced as well. So I think I don't have a good answer for that. I think just be prepared for it to take a while. So as our team members always say, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I guess I'm just kind of blindly faithful that as you develop your track record, attribution, returns, it will just become obvious. And I think what Gary was saying about not having to use a gender lens to just, it being kind of an obvious solution that we don't need to look at women as a separate asset class, but really once the capital's there, once the returns are obvious, it will be like almost a no-brainer to be backing them. So we won't need to do all this extra kind of marketing, promotion, and activist, kind of investment techniques that we use now. But it's not for the faint of heart. And I think that's, again, why there aren't that many women GPs, because we didn't talk so much about unconscious bias, but I think that's a key issue here. So.
And I guess maybe, sorry, Mark?
My comment was, I had this conversation over the weekend with Heather, it's on us, we're allies, but we're just lazy. Right? It is. We're just, I don't want to, we have to, it's just like I'm going to do this event in Ohio. People fly over Ohio, but it's not in our immediate vicinity, although I'm surrounded by, my wife's a Googler and all the rest. So I'm drinking from the Kool-Aid, but I just think, and we want to, and anybody has other people like Heather, we want to meet Heathers of the world. At least 361 does.
And at least, while we're here, because soon we'll be literally on Mars.
That's a typical Simon Vine comment. You get used to it.
Mars are men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and now it becomes a reality.
Oh, I see that I'm late to the gesture. Okay. Denise, carry on. And there's no deadline here.
All right, so one other kind of related question we have is, how can you promote exits for women-funded companies and founded companies? With such a value opportunity to buy lower, seeking out women-led companies, there also needs to be more opportunities to exit and generate return. Anybody have any comments on or thoughts on that question?
Yeah, definitely. I'll tell you why. I mean, it's private equity. That the old saying is, if private equity is like a burning room, you have to know your exit before you get in. And I think certainly with our investments and with the projects that I'm involved in, we have exits for investors from the get-go. So they have to understand when they're going to be able to exit. And generally, because these projects involve patients, these are not quick fixes. They exit in 5 years, say, but there are exit programs that are installed from the very beginning. Otherwise, I don't think that we would capture that audience.
Thanks, Susan. And actually, a question that came in earlier in the chat, way earlier in the chat for you, was a question on the stats that you presented on Africa and a reconciliation between, which I thought was surprising, that Africa leads in representation of females on boards, yet has quite a low VC rate comparable to the US. How do you reconcile both of those trends, or is there a way to do that?
I think that there is, it's quite hard to reconcile that, because that fact is quite a shock, as a matter of fact. But when one looks at operating in Africa, it's notable that women are, first of all, very vocal. Educated women are extremely vocal in Africa. And when you attend any kind of gatherings of businesses in Africa, you will see that there is generally a pretty substantial audience of females. Depending on what you're doing. I mean, when I'm operating a project on the ground, then it is much like what some of the women have just discussed. I am one of the only women there. But when I'm at a business conference, there are quite a few women. They're very vocal, and there is I know that very low numbers of women go to university, very low numbers of Africans go to university, as a matter of fact, compared to the rest of the world. But there seems to be a lot of power, excuse me, with the people that do go in running these companies globally, excuse me. Excuse me. And so what we're seeing is the educated masses that are running the large companies. And they are women and men. Sorry, I've got to get some water.
Thanks, Susan.
Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mark.
No, it's all good. That usually happens to Stephen Burke, but that happens.
Sorry, that doesn't usually happen.
She's taking the torch from him. So the presentation I gave, I really do focus on the why, because again, I really think that if we can nail that down, the real reasons of the why, because we have the tools, technology, there's capital, there's interest, there's supply, there's demand, but the question is why. And there's one interesting comment here from Lauren. I'm having visions of commentators on certain media outlets who would say this meeting is too woke. Probably not enough time, but would love to know how the women business leaders on this call push back against that type of mindset. So love the question, because I think that we're unearthing another dimension of the why. But can you just explain to me a little bit more what you mean by that? And then I'm sure there's plenty of people on the call that would like to give an answer.
Well, I mean, a thing of it is, we always, I think, in discussions like this, we always try to, you could say, make sure that we're not diving into what you would call political discussions, but it definitely seems like that this is a new theme that is being, pushed in certain, in certain quarters, so to speak, that, what companies and what people who are involved in business are supposed to be doing is just thinking strictly about their bottom line, right? And that anything that they do is not even supposed to come close to something that would be affecting, you could say, the social dynamic of, what we're doing. And so, especially Heather's presentation, right? I could definitely see, and they've used they've seized on this word woke, which is, I guess, a millennial term, right? As a way of kind of characterizing this idea of, I guess, this overreach, and particularly like Heather's presentation, you could see, some pushback on in this way. And so I'm just wondering, what do you, Denise and Heather, what do some of the, the women who have been in these environments where, there are not enough females at the table, how do you push back against this kind of thing? That's just what I'm, that's what I'm wondering.
We just use
Sorry
data.
that took so long.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you're totally right, Lauren. I mean, we just quote data points all the time because to me, that's the only thing that's going to change mindsets. You know, when especially when you're talking to investors, like, it doesn't always result in change, but you can't argue with numbers often, right? So the more data points you can show, and it does feel a little bit like insanity that we just keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, which is part of why we wanted to set up a new model like Mindshift, where we keep hearing objections. Oh, we don't have women on our team because there aren't enough of them. Women don't understand finance. They don't understand numbers. They're not quantitative. And I used to believe that as well myself. During my business school education, I just thought I'm the only woman in the room because women aren't good at numbers. But then I started seeing through my kids that, and I've actually got 2 sons. So it's, but seeing the girls even at a very young age, the girls outperformed in science and math. We see that in the Middle East all the time. The outperformers and the strong candidates coming out of the engineering schools and computer science programs are women. So
I used to be in a reading mentoring program, and a lot of times I would find the girls were in there sneaking doing their math homework. half the time I'd walk by and I'd look at, wait a minute, what is it? That's a math book.
You're not supposed to be doing that. You're a girl.
Well, I mean, in the reading mentor class, I almost wanted to switch and say, hey, look, maybe I should be tutoring math in this, because that's what they seem to be interested in.
I want to add 2 quick points there, and then perhaps we'll open up because I have some questions for the gentleman in the room in response to that. Lauren, is that even though I've grown up around strong women my whole life, and I just younger assumed everyone was like that. Some of them in my life were strong because they had to be, others because they wanted to be.
My mother ran her own business for 35 years, so I just my jaw's on the table with a lot of this. And I think another comment that I made that I would want to share is this idea of just, outdated gender roles. Why is it that the men are the aggressive, competitive ones and the women are supposed to be the nurturing, cooperative ones? I mean, that's some 1960 stuff if I've never heard it,
Yeah, you're 100% right there. The idea, if you were asking me to repeat what a feminist is, I couldn't tell you. That's a word I never absorbed. I could never describe what it actually is. But recently I kind of heard the phrase and the term humanist, and I was like, wow, well, that fits like a glove. Because at the end of the day, we're all human and we're 99% the same. We're just so marginally different. And the conversation piece around focusing on what makes us different, you have to climb out of a hole to get to a common point. So I look at everything as humanism and being a humanist. So
I lived for over 20 years in Europe, and I literally can say that I have experienced pretty much every form of life you could live in the Western world, from sleeping on the street to being like in villas overlooking the beautiful land. And I will have to say that's the one thing I've come away from that experience. I can say without fear of contradiction, people are 98%, 97% the same, what they want. They all want to be able to take care of their families, know that what they're doing with their life has some, meaning or value to it, really. And what makes us different is literally like, what kind of food we like,
Yeah, it's a powerful position to come at it from our common points. And the other point I want to make here is that thinking like a futurist has a lot to do with looking at the past. And when I step out and I look historically at the US is a very, very young country relative to many other medieval European countries. And look what this country has done in 250 odd years. So my perspective is not that there is a bunch of guys in pinstripe suits sitting around a table cackling, holding women down in the workforce. Perhaps that may in the 60s, maybe, but not now. I think that this is just a natural evolution of the country and our population and how we work together. And women for sure have passed values down from family to family and generation to generation, but something's changing. And I think that the future of work is a female, and from the point of view that I think it's up to women to actually step in and role model what it is to be human at work over these next coming decades in the world of work. I think it's a responsibility upon us. And I'm interested in this conversation that maps out that ecosystem, that brings that to life and makes that a real thing sooner rather than later, so that we can leave less money and opportunity on the table. So with that, I know we're almost at 1:15. I just had a really good, interesting question for the gentlemen in the room that are hearing this information. It might seem, some maybe it's new, maybe it's high level, maybe it's provocative, but what is your reaction to what you've heard today in terms of the future is female? Do you think the future is female? Can we get there? Would love to know, get some input.
Yeah, I just had a couple of thoughts on that, Denise. Thank you. This has been a great presentation. I grew up in my grandparents' house, mostly when I was young in India, and I had a grandmother who was just a force of nature. She just was a wonderful woman. And then, that experience, along with the fact that she raised her daughters and sons at the same focus on studying, and that's proven out. My uncles and aunts have similar sets of achievements. My aunts actually have done, and my mother has done more than my uncles have. But I think the key to having men, as Mark was saying earlier, focus more, because we get distracted and get tunnel vision, and we don't see the obvious in front of our face sometimes, is to actively tell us when we're not doing something. So for example, Lisa Sky told me when our cannabis panel was too many men a few months ago.
Well, to be fair, it was only men. And we just I can't even post this. Right?
Yep. It was embarrassing to post. And that led to an outreach and led to really, really great women and minority speakers at the event. And that's become kind of a model now for future events. But I just want to say, I also have a 5-year-old daughter, and I have to say that I actively involve myself in women-focused events so that I can, along with my wife, of course, translate that to more actionable items in parenting. So the math part came up, for example. She's great at math. She loves numbers. She plays with numbers. I think sometimes women have that feeling because just like they're asked to plan family events and all sorts of activities, they're not asked to do math. And so women not being good at math, part of math is repetition, is an old attitude that existed, I think, partly because men were asked to do the math and the taxes and the financial budgeting and everything, and women were not. I think those things have changed drastically from the prior generation. So I'm just really grateful to see this group and the speakers that were involved, and it was very, very educational. So thank you.
I think maybe a little differently. I think this is a great topic, but I think it's catching up because I think it's already a fait accompli. Columbia University's School of Engineering class is over 50% women. And I know people such as myself and such as Anad who just spoke, we are very much encouraging our daughters to track along a path. And, to brag for half a second, my daughter's finishing her junior year in high school and has completed the most complex math that she can take in high school and is taking a class this summer at Harvard in multivariable calculus, which friends of mine who tutor say, boy, that's really pretty advanced. And I think that children, women today really have as role models an awful lot of awareness of what their opportunities are. There are plenty of strong women professionally that they see that act as role models, at least in my situation. I think the challenge perhaps, and we've talked about this a lot, being able to spread across socioeconomic classes. And so my daughter is very well, I think, positioned by having people like me, or Anad, your daughter, by having a person like you encourage her. And it's the women that don't have the advantages of a person like me or a person like Anad to encourage them. That's the real challenge. I think that's the real effort. And I think that's the maybe an underserved focus of how to create opportunities, awareness, platforms to give rise to that entire opportunity. I think the women on this program very accomplished. Abby Johnson was in my section of business school, right? Very accomplished.
But Jim, just because I've known you personally, have more degrees than I'll ever anybody on here. I mean, you're very educated. Our children are lucky. Let me raise it from parenting to back to what 361 can do, because we want to. I know that you're looking for good returns. It's the same time, and if Heather can give it to you, you should take a look at her. And I think that's what I'd like to know. What Denise, I know where I'm single focused. I'm going to find more female-led funds and deals that I'm going to ask the community to bring us. But how do we use this forum? I know how the future of work is going to have the gig economy, which I believe plays to the skill sets you're talking about for women. But how do we want to take this? When I have ever said, let's have a women finance group, and there was like half the women say yes, half the women say I don't want anything like that. Just like you shunned feminism. But what should our forum be to keep this going, other than expanding the community, expanding the deal flow with that filter?
The reason I was excited to have this panel, and I think we wrote it one of the original descriptions, is that it's a fresh look at the potential for the future to be female and women at work. And I think that, in our prep calls, Susan had mentioned that there are a lot of efforts happening in pockets that are not connected and are somewhat directionless. And more than anything, an example like an Elevate, Susan, which I know that you have a linkage to, when I see a situation like a networking group around women, which is a go-to model for how do we solve for this, that tends to be women talking to women in a closed circle who it's positive because you illuminate the problems and you realize you're not the only one and there's validity to that. But that tends to put us back into a system that is broken to begin with. So what I'm proposing is that when I say the future is female, that's what me and my team are working on, is creating an operational framework for what that means. So how can the ecosystem and the players and the stakeholders in the ecosystem, almost like a credential, not a credential, but almost like a 10-point framework on the things that you need to think about when investing, when dealing. What are those standards that we hold each other to? And almost like a guidebook or a playbook for the future is female in a fresh perspective, what that means and connecting women to opportunities. In my mind, that's what we're working at. We're more than happy to share that and get collaboration here. But I think that is an actionable point that can remove out the emotion, that can look at the economics and the moral opportunity and connect it in a meaningful way.
Denise, I completely agree with you. My sense is that, of course, there is a group of people, women or men or minorities who need hand-holding and need to be welcomed to the world, and they need support that, not everybody is bad, and don't be afraid. Let us teach you how to deal with our kind and make you feel comfortable. That's what I think James was talking about. And this mentorship is, of course, needed. But there are many groups around who are providing this mentorship. My sense is that our modus operandi is different. We can actually do something on our own without asking for big groups, for education, re-education. We're in a very unique position on this platform, especially because there are so many people who really want to make a change. And let's make it, because we can invest, we can talk to people, to our friends, and make them aware of the issue. And again, the major premise here today, which sounded so loud and so clear, and thank you all the speakers, that it is a business case. Let's not, my suggestion is not to go into the areas which are already occupied, to be compassionate mentors. Let's come up with money and let's invest.
That's my mindset right now. We just need to get the funnel going. Doesn't mean we'll take everyone, but let's find the top tier of this that have this quality, and not just women. It's diversity.
Mark, I think you should create a subcommittee for this topic and get interested parties to join and have a brainstorming session and see how we can connect and collaborate on how we put pieces together. But it has to be practical, it has to be operational, and it has to be systemic.
All right, as long as you're the co-leader of that, then yes.
I'm down. Alex, did you have one last comment there on something that was said?
I did, yes. Thank you, Denise. I wanted to refer back to what James had said about his daughter being active in STEM and sciences and having the opportunities. I mentor a lot of young women and actually teenage women. My foundation, I set up my foundation in the name of my great-grandma, who was amazing, kind of lived at the time of Marie Curie. And we ran a program with the Embassy of Israel and many other embassies where become an ambassador for a day. And we reached out to girls aged 13 to 17. Amazing girls, you know, socially oriented, most of them STEM focused and so on. And then another conversation, part of many events pre-COVID, were younger kind of 25, 26-year-old women, for example, from Google engineering departments would come up to me hearing this kind of a discussion, dialogue by kind of older people to them, said, we don't understand what you're actually talking about. We feel empowered. We feel ready for any challenge. We don't feel hampered in any way. What is this discussion about? And what these up and coming, you know, young women don't realize that the moment they want to start a family, or the moment they enter into an environment where a few guys will make silly jokes, which will stick, which will get into their mindset, they will slowly start withdrawing. By the age of 32, regardless of how amazing they might have been at the university, they will find reasons, they will color them up, and they'll say, I'm not going to be in the middle of the battlefield with all these crazy people. Like, I will have something easier. I cannot deal with this anymore. So the important thing is to create a system that will take these amazing minds through the cycle, through the life cycle, because they will hit obstacles that they might not even share with their fathers, with uncles, because it's, so I think that's why it's important to think of systemic solutions, just so we can scale up.
Ready to go.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree completely. James, my father was like you, and I thought the same as your daughter. And then I got into boards where I was the only woman and started to get stomach pains from being bullied on boards. And I really don't think you realize it until you have a family. And my husband actually was in my MBA class, so we're complete equals. Actually, I always made more money than he did. He went to MIT, you know, he's smart, everything, but I think it really doesn't hit you until you're more senior in your career.
I 100% echo that. I want to thank everyone so much for their comments. I work with Denise, but I spent before finding her, I spent the first 17 years of my career working in traditional broadcast media and then moving over to the tech world working for Google. I thankfully had a father who allowed, and a mother who allowed me to believe that I could do anything. I played a Division I sport, graduated from Boston University, came right out of the gates running, and was on many panels, nominated to many honors. I burned out after having 3 kids because while I was taught that I could do it all, I didn't realize that I couldn't do it all at once. And so I did not set up the structure around me to facilitate that life. And I did not have that example shown to me either. So I think there are plenty of smart women out there. I am now a career coach as well. I work with many women who are extremely smart, who are very concerned about what's going to happen to them upon having families, whether they've chosen the right partner or not to support that lifestyle. So I just want to agree with the fact that this is systemic change. It's so important to be having these conversations and to be getting the investments in so that more smart driven women who can really impact GDP in the bottom line stop opting out and dropping out, and that we help invest in creating those systems for them. So thank you, everyone.
Can I just give one perspective though? I really, and
just want, Nazube has his hand up. If you could just,
okay, sorry.
Hold your thought.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you, Mark. And it's been a great discussion so far. And I just want to make a quick contribution, a comment, and perhaps one suggestion. In terms of spaces that women can inhabit and safely talk with other women, I wouldn't diminish the value of that. So I say that as a Black person who is gay, and I know that I have spaces that are only gay, I have spaces that are only male, that are safe for us to talk about and, you know, crystallize what the issues are without being feeling the threat of the wider society, so to speak. And it helps us to kind of just identify, organize, and then we go to the second order. I think a colleague mentioned earlier, where we can then work with allies and people that are not necessarily part of that community in a way that allows us to join forces. So I think one shouldn't undervalue safe spaces. The other thing is around intersectionality, and it's great. There are a lot of amazing women on this panel, and the example I give around, obviously, it's been 100 years since women could vote in the US, but not all women were allowed to vote 100 years ago. It wasn't until the 50s, the Japanese Americans, and it wasn't until the 60s, the African Americans were allowed to vote. So when it comes to female rights, I think it's also just as important to think about the wide range of female representation, to make it as inclusive as possible, so they don't have a repeat of what's happening in wider society within the gender movement.
Lauren, sorry.
Just really quickly, and once again, somehow you will hear this type of thing from me if I'm on these calls, but I would also really urge the women, the excellent women leaders that I've heard on this call. You probably also need to get with some Black women founders and some Black women VCs, because, and the reason why I give you that comment, okay, I think about, for instance, my mother. One thing that my mother and the people in her generation always says that, look, a lot of these kind of gender issues, these were not issues for us. Like when my parents got married back in the 50s, my mother was making more money than my father was. So, and back then it was and I remember she would tell that joke, oh, Elworth, my father, oh, Elworth, you gonna let your wife work? He says, are you crazy? Of course she's gonna work. And so I think you would also find too that the families of women like my mother, you will find men that have already gotten past these issues way long time ago, because for most Black families to have a middle-class lifestyle, they had to have two women working. They had to have two educated, people in the household, right? And so I think that you would also really find a lot of, comradeship, so to speak, if you were to get with some Black women founders and Black women VCs.
Lauren,
if there are any, I don't even know if there are any. There's such a thing as a Black woman VC firm.
Absolutely. Well, to the extent that you have entrepreneurial, whether they're leaders or whatever part of business or finance, please bring them. That's how this works. They will be welcomed warmly.
I'm going to make that a not distant future thing, but that's something I want to talk to you about too, definitely.
Great.
So I thought the comments are just now were really interesting about whether it's the glass ceiling within organizations or the cultures, the embedded cultures within organizations that I quite candidly didn't appreciate. And I wonder how the conversation about the future of work alters all, because we're getting into a very different, perhaps, future of how people work. And also, I would encourage as well, universities. I've been dealing a lot with Columbia University School of Engineering, and the majority of people that I talk to are women, and what their roles are, going forward. And so I think there's multiple levels to think about and talk about and address the myriad of issues. But thank you.
Well, it seems like so many people are still with us from the very beginning. It just shows how many men and women are dedicated to this issue and wanted to fly to to realize all the potential. So why don't we plan something which Mark and Denise decided on to create a collab, and why don't we run a similar event in a couple of months with very good ideas, specific ideas like the ones which we heard today from Heather, and we see if we can find investors for these ideas to actually do something. Because again, there's so much hand-holding in this world, especially in the United States, but it leads, I think, at this point to frustration. So many people talk and the issues are still the same. Let's be different.
And just as a practical, then thank you. So I totally agree. We have an onboard part of our website. You know, if you've got deals, you know, or funds, or philanthropies, you know, or even strategic advisors, you know, that are women or bringing that diversity. You know, the part of the deals will not be public. Just give some basic information, and then at some point, then you give information that only goes to me and to our internal team. So just as you see things, email me, use the onboard, reach out to anybody. There is an app, but you don't have to always use the app, but I'm just trying to keep our community interconnected. And this was recorded. We will, you know, a lot of people couldn't make it, but hopefully it'll catalyze, like we said. And it takes a village, so help us.
Hey, listen, I'm not just saying it. There's tons of these kind of like networking groups out of there, but I really got to say I'm really getting a lot out of the time that I'm spending with 361. I'm not just saying that, really.
Appreciate it, Lauren.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, for creating this platform, and Denise for co-leading the event, and all the wonderful keynote speakers who came to us from different parts of the world. It's already late night there, and you're still with us. And thank you for being with us, everybody who has been listening to us and contributing. Look forward to seeing you at our future work events.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Denise. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Analyzing the information in the remaining 6 to 8 hours.